Hey guys, Square with Camel Adventure Products. We're going to do the install video tonight on the Yamaha WR250R. Very straightforward install, no drilling, no cutting. Take about an hour or so to do it. When we do it, we're going to take off the helmet lock. Your toolbox that's on the side here needs to come off as well. And your factory chain guard. We've got a low profile aluminum chain guard that's going to go on in place. Normally they're powder coated black. I didn't get one back from powder coater in time for the video though, and we'll get started. The first thing we're going to do is take off the helmet lock. So you just need your key, pop it open, and then we've got a T30 Torx bit here, and there will be a little bit of Loctite on there, so it can be a little bit tight. Pull that off. We've got a M8 flathead here. It's going to go in the big hole on our billet bracket. And a touch of blue Loctite. And it's going to go in the bigger hole here on the back. And then an M6 flathead as well. And then your helmet lock can actually go back on. Just put Loctite, and we've got a locating dowel here on the back of the helmet lock, and the original bolt here is just going to go in the hole at the front. The brackets on here are for retaining the factory toolbox, which we're going to need to take off. The lower bracket is what we're going to attach our lower mounting point for the tank. And this is our lower bracket here, and it's just going to fit on there like that. And we've got the M6 socket head bolts. You are probably going to be cursing my name when you're going to put these on here because the two of them are back to back. They are a fairly tight fit, and it can be a little bit of a challenge to get a wrench on to hold the nuts when you're tightening these up. You can't get the closed end on, so you just have to go over top. And we're not going to totally tighten these up right now. We do want some wiggle when we go to put the tank on. And this is our main mounting bracket here for the tank. And it's going to go up to the fourth hole on the billet bracket here. And then we need something for lateral strength. And this guy here is going to tuck up underneath the taillight bracket. And we designed this to work with the factory taillight assembly or the very popular DRC Edge. So it's going to go up under here, and then this spacer is going to go under the back part of the taillight bracket just to keep things even, and that gives us our lateral strength here. So to do this, we're going to take out the 4 bolts that hold the taillight assembly on. So this bike has the rear fender drilled for a cargo plate. So the 4 bolts here that hold the taillight, or the license plate and taillight bracket, are accessible, but yours likely aren't unless you have this drilled. So we've got to take the seat off. There's 2 8mm bolts that are up underneath here. And we do need to take these lower panels off here, so this is a good time to do that. The bike's ECM is here. I'm just going to take that rubber band off, and then we can pull that out of the way. And then we've got these 2 bolts here, retain the fender. I need to be careful. There's some load limiting spacers in here so you don't crush the plastic. Because this one has had some Loctite in here a few times, one stayed in, one stayed with the bolt. Just make sure you don't lose those. I'm just going to take this up and off. All right, under these 2 locations here is where we're going to mount the lateral support bracket. We've got M6 socket heads, M6 by 20s, and flat washers and nylocks. And I'm just going to drop those guys in from the top. Alright, before we try and put the spacer in the back here, the factory DRC bolt is too long. And we've got it here. So we've included a shorter one that's going to go in, and we just set this aside for now. And then the spacer again is going to go between the subframe and the license plate bracket. Now obviously if you have a cargo plate on here and you have spacers and you've drilled through the fender, you're going to need longer bolts here. And the length of those bolts is going to vary depending on the brand, so that's something you'll have to source on your own, the appropriate length bolts to fit here with the cargo plate. Alright, and then we can put the rear fender back on. It's important that you get this tab A and slot B as you do this. When you pull your tank out of the box, there's no brackets or anything on it or fittings. And we've got our ORB fuel fitting here and stainless backing washer that has a bevel on it. The bevel is going to go towards that O-ring. And this is just a secondary seal on the tank. It's kind of an umbrella idea. And it just goes into the brass insert on the front of the tank here. And when you tighten this up, it doesn't need to be very tight. You're just looking for the washer to stick out about a millimeter or a 1/16, just a little bit. If you over tighten that, you'll split the washer and it'll leak. No problem. And then on the back side here, we have our main mounting bracket. And it just lays in there like that. And we're going to do 3 of the 4. So it's the top one and the 2 bottom. We're leaving the middle one out. And we're not going to totally tighten these up, just so they're not rattling around. In your fastener package, there's an M8 by 16 button head, and that's going to go into the back here through the mounting bracket with a flat washer. If you've purchased our tethered fuel cap, this is the correct mounting location for it. Just loop it over the main mounting bracket before you put the M8 button head through. When you put the Loctite in the hole in the cap, just make sure that you put it in there lightly. If you put too much in, when you put the bolt in, it squishes out, and then the tether ends up binding in there. Alright, and then on the back side of our front bracket here, we're going to use the large head flanged M6 bolts. And in this location here, we're going to put our M6 by 16 button head. And that's going to give us lateral support here. If you happen to drop the bike on this side, the tank's not going to end up in the tire. As I mentioned before, your factory chain guard isn't compatible with the tank. It's just a little bit too high in here, and we would have lost volume with it. So we have the aftermarket aluminum one, which is just a little bit lower, a little bit flatter at the top. So and we're going to put the new chain guard on with the M6 by 10 button heads. We need to remove the front left side panel. There's one Phillips bolt on the tank. And on the front, there's a couple of Allen head bolts here as well. Alright, with access to the side of the bike, we can run our fuel lines. So off of the vent barb on the back of the tank, we're going to put the 90-degree hose and secure it with a spring hose clamp. And then at the end of that, we get our barb. And again, hose clamp. And the reason for the 90 off the back of the tank is if we try and just use the hose without the 90, it's a really big arch here. It's really tough when you have a cargo plate on here, you have luggage, it will end up kinking the hose. If it kinks, then we have no airflow and fuel's not going to flow. The 90 in here is fairly tall. The barb comes to about here. So if your cargo plate is a little bit lower, you can trim a little bit off this just to get this even tighter. And we're going to run the hose in behind the main bracket here. And then we're going to secure around the main bracket as well with a zip tie. Whenever you're putting these on here, you want to make sure you don't have them too tight that you're going to king and crush the hose. And then we're going to come up. There's one of the other brackets here from the toolbox. Is a great spot to zip tie the vent line. And when we get down here, we're going to make a sharp 90 around the bottom of the inner fender and come up over top of this. Normally there's an exhaust flapper servo that's in here. It's been removed on this bike. If yours has been removed, no problem. You can just run it. You can run it straight through. Generally speaking, that's full of stuff. So we're going to come up. We're going to come up and over with that. Because we have a fairly sharp bend here, the hose can kink, and then you have no flow, as we mentioned before. So we've included a 90-degree fitting just to get that around this corner without worrying about kinking it. Just going to mark the hose at the bend point. And we're going to snip it off. It's always a good idea to wear safety glasses when you're dealing with these spring clamps. They go flying across the shop, and if you happen to catch it in the eye, it doesn't feel very good. Again, if you're doing this on a bike that doesn't have the servo in there, you don't need to put the 90 in. You just need to make sure, though, that that you don't have any kinks when you do it. And over top, we're going to go over top the reservoir on the shock and down out ahead of the shock, out the bottom here, and then we're just going to trim it to length. And along here, we're just going to secure this with zip ties. I should mention there's two different sizes of clamps here, and they're very similar in size. Generally speaking, the larger ones are a little bit shinier than the small ones. Is the easiest way to do it, but yeah, they're kind of tough to see. So anything that's on the vent side is going to be the smaller clamps. Anything that's on the fuel supply side is going to be the larger. And then our fuel hose is going to follow the same route as the vent hose. And when we get to the top, we need somewhere to tie into the main tank. There are some aftermarket options for fuel caps that have a barb on the top. So if you already have one of those, you don't need one from us. Our tank is compatible with larger aftermarket front-mounted tanks, and almost all of them have a cap that has a barb on the top. So we are able to plug our fuel line into that and have the Camel Tank feed. But if you do have the factory Yamaha cap, we have a solution for you. So let's go over to the bench and swap this stuff over. So with this factory cap, it actually vents out everywhere underneath it, just all the way around. So we have nowhere to kind of harness the vacuum out of the main tank. So with this one here, we've got the barb on top, and it's a blank piece. So we use the guts from the bottom here rather than completely redesigning all of this. And we just need a Phillips screwdriver. And be careful because that is spring loaded. Okay, so when you flip this over, just be careful because there's a couple little springs under here and they just go in those pockets. And just make sure you don't lose them. And you can take the Ziploc bag that originally has the Camel Tank fasteners, and you can put your factory bits in there. This is the piece that we need here, and this stuff we don't need. And there is the washer there that can go in with your parts as well. And we can set all of that aside. So we've got our spacers here. They're going to drop in the holes. A little bit of blue Loctite. We do have lock washers on here as well. And those are tiny little bolts, so there's not a lot of torque required on them. Alright, so with that, and now we've got a nice spot to tie into for vacuum for the Camel Tank. Then we've got another 90-degree hose, so one of the smaller hose clamps. And then another hose barb. It is important that these all get clamped because this is vacuum to pull the fuel. So if there's a vacuum leak, you're going to have a hard time getting fuel to transfer properly. And then we're just going to snip the armored fuel line back in a good spot here. Just a note here on the fuel line, this is the braided armor line, and sometimes the coating can fray, so when you go to slide the hose clamp on, the coating will pull back and it will drive you insane. So if you put a wrap of duct tape on the end, or electrical tape on the end, when you go to do it, then that will keep everything where it's supposed to be so you can get the clamp on easy. The orientation doesn't matter for functionality, but if you have them pointing out like this, then they're not scraping against the frame or against the tank. Zip tie and loop it around the front tab on the tank here just to keep that in a good spot. So once we have this plumbed, before we start putting panels back on, you want to make sure that the fuel supply line and the vent line aren't kinked. Make sure that they're not rubbing on anything sharp they're going to end up wearing through, and just all of your connections here, that your zip ties aren't too tight, and yeah, so just anything sharp. The armored line is quite strong, but again, it's just kind of a best practices situation, especially at the back here, because we do have the suspensions moving a little bit. With this hose is going to be in behind the reservoir, so it's not pinched anywhere. This is a little bit of a tighter situation here for guys that have the factory servo in here still, so that would be an area you really want to keep an eye on before you put it back together. But everything on this one looks good, so we can button it all back up. When you're removing and installing your main cap here, you want to make sure that you grab the hose when you do this. You just don't want to be twisting and twisting and twisting the hose. It will spin on the barb here after it gets a little bit of use, but right now the ridges that are in the barb, there's quite a bit of pressure on the hose, so until that wears in, just try and keep it as straight as you can. Okay, that wraps up our install on the Yamaha WR250R. Thanks for watching.
Yeah.